Renette Riella Bergna dies, but her husband escapes with barely a scratch.
It was hard for me to believe that my sister and him were both in the vehicle and he didn't wind up the same way she did.
Some believe this is no accident.
Murder was perfect for him. It was the cheaper way out.
But proving this man is a killer may be impossible.
This was a viciously fought battle.
This is the story of a mysterious death, a courtroom drama, and a jury that could go either way.
I thought we had a chance. I really did.
Incline Village, Nevada is a prosperous town on the shores of Lake Tahoe, the famous resort straddling the California-Nevada border. 45-year-old Peter Bergna and his wife Renette, age 49, are a fixture of the local community.
My sister was a pharmacist. She was a very outgoing, bubbly person, very positive person. She did not dwell on the negative. When she became your friend, she was friends for decades. She just saw good in everybody.
Peter Bergna works out of the couple's comfortable home in Incline Village. He is an appraiser for Butterfield and Butterfield, a respected San Francisco auction house.
He had dealt with collectibles, antiques, and stuff like that, and he bought and sold them, and he was very good at his job. He knew his stuff.
With a large income and no kids, the Bergnas spend much of their time indulging Renette's passion for European travel. In 1998, Renette decides to turn her hobby into a full-time career. She quits her job as a pharmacist to become a tour guide. From now on, she will be spending weeks at a time away from Peter, and her income will be dramatically reduced.
Well, he didn't like it. It wasn't that she was making minimum wage, but she just wasn't making the money that she was being a pharmacist.
On the evening of May 31st, 1998, Renette lands in Reno after her first guiding trip to Italy. She's been traveling for nearly 24 hours. But instead of driving her home, Bergna insists they go straight to a remote hillside overlooking the lights of the city.
It's actually a very nice place. It overlooks the entire valley. There's a very steep embankment, large cliff and whatnot.
When they reach the lookout spot, they talk for an hour and a half and then decide to head home. As Bergna's truck heads back towards the main road, something goes horribly wrong.
The vehicle went through the guardrail, down the embankment, and traveled some 800 plus feet down the hillside.
Somehow, Bergna survives the crash and calls 911. Highway Patrolman John Schilling responds and is the first person to arrive at the crash site.
When I arrived on the scene, Peter was found approximately 100 feet down the hillside from the roadway. Renette, we ultimately made it down to the vehicle, and she was inside the vehicle. For the pickup truck to travel from the roadway down to the hillside only took a very short period of time, and so, yes, I think that Renette passed away quite quickly.
When daylight breaks, the horrific nature of the crash and the scale of the drop becomes clear. Bergna's survival seems nothing short of miraculous.
I had just got to work, and my brother called me and told me that we had lost our sister in a car wreck.
Sheriff's deputies are curious about how Bergna managed to escape from the truck with nothing more than a sprained ankle and a bruise on his head, but he becomes strangely defensive when they question him about it.
Somehow I got out of the truck. Can we probably assume that he was still in the truck when we threw it? Assume anything you want. I can't help you here. I can't help you.
When I've gone to a scene where people have been ejected or thrown out of a vehicle, usually they're a little more disturbed in their clothing, their appearance. Peter, when he was laying on the side of the hill, it looked like he had just basically laid down.
In the weeks following the crash, police begin to wonder how accidental it really was. They bring all their evidence to the district attorney's office for a second opinion.
Things were not adding up. This was an individual who was allegedly ejected from a vehicle who hardly had any injuries on him.
He filled up additional fuel cans that were in the back of his pickup truck, and when you closely examine those, there was an open hole for the fuel to spill.
It could have been a simple oversight, or it could mean Bergna wanted the truck to catch fire. Suspicion of Peter Bergna reaches a head when police review his interviews from the immediate aftermath of the crash.
There were a host of things that Peter said in there that were questionable at best.
Police in Washoe County, Nevada are increasingly suspicious of Peter Bergna after he survived a devastating car crash that claimed the life of his wife, Renette. As investigators probe deeper into Bergna's background, they discover he wasn't the loving husband he appeared to be.
There was times I thought he verbally abused her in front of everybody, and I didn't think that was necessary.
The night before he picked up Renette from the airport, he was out flirting with women, drinking with women. Then right after the incident, he was groping women in a hot tub.
However, upon Renette's death, Bergna cashed in a handsome life insurance policy and collected a large share of his wife's family estate. He inherits more than $750,000. But despite having motive and opportunity, it is still possible that the crash is simply what Bergna claims, a tragic and inexplicable accident.
At first I thought, that maybe they got in an argument and he gunned it. At least I would have had some kind of peace of mind of what the reasoning was behind it, but whatever he was saying didn't fit what happened. And it just didn't add up.
In early 1999, Bergna sells the house he shared with Renette and moves to Seattle, Washington, where he becomes engaged to a new woman. But the case remains open, and John Schilling in particular is determined to learn the truth about what happened on the mountainside. Even in his spare time, he keeps working on the investigation.
We did some testing. We actually acquired a Ford F-150 that was extremely close to Mr. Bergna's vehicle.
Vehicle's in drive. Emergency brake is on. Trooper Schilling's on the side here.
Schilling, an experienced accident investigator, finds a huge flaw in Bergna's account of how the crash occurred.
I placed the vehicle in numerous practice runs up there in which we would take the vehicle and allow it to, under its own power, go down the roadway.
What's our speed, right? We're 17, 18, 19, 20.
According to Bergna, his truck wasn't going much faster than 20 miles per hour. But by the time it reached the point of impact, marked here with an X, he could not prevent it crashing through the guardrail. When Schilling tries to recreate the crash, he discovers that Bergna is lying. No vehicle driving normally down this road could ever end up crashing through the guardrail at that point.
There we go. Show where the impactor was at over there.
Unless it is intentionally driven off the cliff.
It was definitely determined that if the vehicle was let go down the road, that it would never make it to the guardrail.
He concludes that Bergna must have deliberately rammed his truck into the guardrail at high speed. He also has a theory about why Bergna was so lightly injured. He jumped out before the truck left the road.
Later on, we did an examination of the clothing that Mr. Bergna was wearing, and in several areas on his clothing were deposits of asphalt. For Mr. Bergna to be ejected after going through the guardrail is not a possibility. He came out on the roadway, and that's how the asphalt was deposited on his clothes.
All the evidence seems to point to one conclusion.
Once you take all of these items and you place them together, that's when we determined that this wasn't an accident, that it was a homicide and a planned event.
It's a highly circumstantial case. No single piece of evidence by itself is enough to secure a conviction. But in November 2000, lead prosecutor Dave Clifton persuades a grand jury there is enough to indict Peter Bergna for first-degree murder. Sergeant Schilling is dispatched to Seattle to arrest him.
I knocked on the door, and he opened it, and he saw me. And I said, "I think you know why we're here."
On October 1st, 2001, more than 3 years after the crash that killed Renette Bergna, her husband Peter stands trial for her murder. Vowing to fight the charges all the way, Bergna retains a top-flight legal team, led by a combative Seattle lawyer named Michael Schwartz. In his opening argument, Schwartz presents his own theory of how the crash occurred.
They presented an animation to the jury, and as I was viewing it, I don't know how the defense team felt in any way, shape, or form that this was a professional model.
Although it looks like nonsense to Schilling, the lay people of the jury might just think it's plausible enough to find reasonable doubt. It's a daring and effective strategy.
This was a viciously fought battle, probably the hardest defense team I'd ever been up against.
To make sure the jury believes his version of events, Michael Schwartz tries to discredit Sergeant Schilling and all his work on the investigation.
The biggest thing that they came after was the fact that they said that I was not a college-educated individual when it came to physics.
In fact, John Schilling is one of Nevada's most experienced accident reconstructionists. Using the prosecution's own animation and a detailed model of the crash site, he fights back from the witness stand.
I've done several hundreds, into the thousands of accidents. There's no way that that animation is in any way, shape, or form going to represent what occurred on the hillside that night.
Over 6 grueling weeks, the prosecution presents each piece of the complex puzzle, while the defense tries to show that none of it adds up to a deliberate homicide. To finish their case, the prosecution turns to the character of Bergna. They must prove he is a man capable of killing his wife.
We called Peter Bergna's neighbor who saw him pelting Renette with a snowblower and being horrible to her in their neighborhood. We called former employees who had seen him being a person who was screaming and yelling and exploding like a volcano. We brought in the women who he had hit on prior to Renette being murdered and just right after her murder. He killed his wife so that he could not be married to her. It was literally that simple.
On November 13th, the jury retires to decide, was this an accident or a murder?
When you prosecute a case of this magnitude where you've spent weeks and weeks in trial, thousands of hours of preparation and investigation, and you've got a family who wants justice served for their loved one.
I thought we had a chance. I really did. But I also felt we had a chance that we were going to lose.
For 3 days, nothing is heard from the jury. Then, on day 4, they inform the judge they cannot reach a unanimous verdict. He implores them to keep trying.
Time didn't move too fast. You know, it's not an easy thing to go through. That, you know, whether you're up there or back at home, you're just waiting.
On day 6, Judge Brent Adams polls the jury once again. They are permanently deadlocked.
There was 9 for guilty and 3 for not guilty.
A mistrial is declared, and Peter Bergna is set free. It's a crushing blow to Renette's family. Prosecutors Dave Clifton and Kelly Valoria are equally upset.
At the time, I was exhausted. That was mentally, physically, every type of way exhausted. But it wasn't about me. And, Dave, we felt we had done everything we could do.
We definitely weren't happy about it. I mean, and then there was a question of whether they'd try it again. Dave and Kelly did a heck of a job. And they put their heart and soul into it. And then Dave especially was just, devastated that, and he didn't think he could do it again.
Setting their disappointment aside, the prosecution carefully assesses their chances of securing a guilty verdict with a second try.
It was up to us to decide what we're going to do, whether or not this is a case for retrial. You need to remember, after spending nearly 8 weeks in court and a tremendous cost to the taxpayers of Washoe County, that's not something that we take lightly. With the caveat, this is a murder case, and we don't want murderers walking out on our street for the safety of the community.
Their decision hangs on whether or not they believe they can ever persuade a jury to convict Bergna unanimously.
It was 9-3, and they say on a 11-1 or 10-2, you pretty well go, but 9-3, sometimes you don't.
When Valoria interviews the jury, she discovers some of them failed to do their legal duty. They are required to discuss all the evidence before reaching a verdict. But 3 decided in advance that Peter Bergna was innocent. For 6 days, they stonewalled the other jurors.
They made a decision at the very beginning that they knew what their verdict was going to be. They were not going to participate in discussing it with anybody. That's juror misconduct.
I just was like, I think we got a little bit more work, because I knew that based upon what we had here, that we were going to end up going back to trial.
1 week after the mistrial, District Attorney Richard Gamet announces his decision.
We will go back to trial on Peter Bergna for the charge of murder.
May 6, 2002. All parties return to court to try Peter Bergna for murder all over again. Prosecutors Dave Clifton and Kelly Valoria represent all of the evidence from the first trial. Bergna's inconsistent statements, the gas cans, the asphalt marks, and John Schilling's testimony that it was no accident. They also have one new witness. It turns out Bergna had been married before he met Reinette. His first wife, Rebecca Tillery, is brought to Reno and testifies that in private, Bergna was an abusive and terrifying man. Throughout their 3-year marriage, she lived in fear of him.
She made an impact. She just described what it was like to live behind closed doors as the wife of this man. You know, there was a side that everybody else got to see, and then there was a side the wives got to see. And it allowed Reinette to be heard in the courtroom. It was powerful evidence.
Once again, the case goes to the jury. And once again, the wait for a verdict is agonizing.
It had gone by for days there, and we didn't have any word other than they were still deliberating.
It was a little frustrating because I want to say that the jury, we finished the case at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon Friday, and the judge sent them home at 5. So we had to sit around and wait all weekend. They did not reconvene to deliberate until Monday, and that was a little uncomfortable, but they came back fairly quickly after that weekend break.
When I heard that the jury had made a decision, kind of nervous at first because you don't really get that, I don't know, sigh of relief until you finally hear those words.
The first one we heard from was actually a juror from the first trial that followed it. And she called and asked for me. I couldn't take the call. She said they found him guilty. And I'll tell you, they talk about like a weight going off your chest. It did. That's the only time I've ever felt like that.
Bergna is sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole in the year 2022.
We became very close with the Riella family during this trial. They're just amazing people who did not deserve this. They opened their home to Peter Bergna and loved him, even though they didn't like him, because their sister loved him. And it was just nice to see justice served for them.
Bergna has made numerous appeals. So far, all have failed. The Riella family is eternally grateful to everyone who persevered to find the truth and get justice for Reinette.
I think the best way to say it, they allowed Reinette to be part of their family. They felt a personal connection to her. You have to make her a person, not just a pickup going over the side. That was your sister going over the side. I think they got my sister into that courtroom.